In this chapter, we are looking at techniques and how to improve your ability to attack and hopefully force checkmate of your opponent's king when your opponent's king has lost the right to castle. Now, we all know castling is generally the safest way, the best way to get our king safe, because we get it out of the middle of the board. Most of the action in chess happens in the middle of the board, because that's where everyone points their pieces at the start. And when you have castled, you have three good protectors in front of your king, bodyguards, I call them. Now, there are some things to bear in mind. Just because one side has lost the right to castle, it doesn't always necessarily follow that an attack is the right thing to do against that king, or an attack is going to work. If you throw all your pieces, sacrifice all your pieces, and it doesn't work, you lose the game. So you've got to be careful. But the chances of a successful attack do greatly rise, obviously. And three key things we're going to look at during the course of the following games is, first of all, how can we stop our opponent's king from castling? So spoiling our opponent's chances to castle his king in some clever or brutal way. So drawing it maybe away from the castling square. Number two, if we're able to do that, how we can pursue the attack of the king, normally across the board by forcing moves such as checks. And of course, you have to have the conditions there for this to work. There's no point doing what is a bug house idea, which is doing this kind of thing and thinking, I forced the opponent's king out. Whoa! And obviously here, yes, you have, but you've got no backup. So you need to have the conditions there for it to be successful. And the third thing, really, to follow on with this is the final mating attack, often in the middle or at the edge of the board. Now, this chapter is really fun. There's some really lovely examples, brilliant games here. It's unlikely you're going to get this regularly in your chess games, but it does occur if one side is being lazy, hopefully your opponent. I do remember a funny story, actually. I was playing in the British Championships against a very talented 2300 junior. And at some point, I got a chance to play Queen A4, check. I don't know. I just, it wasn't this position, obviously. I played this check, and he didn't have a bishop and knight here. So let's set up a potential position, which was nothing like the position that we had on the board. I'm setting up a random position, guys. And at some point, I had this check, and the only way out of it, not this position, was for him to move his king, therefore losing his right to castle. And I thought, this check is definitely worth playing, because another point about destroying your opponent's right to castle, it's not always their king that is going to suffer, it's the rook. You can often do this not to attack the king, but to stop their rook coordinating with the rest of the army. So I went check, and my opponent then castled. And he moved his king and he castled. And I sat there for about 5 minutes, and I was like, I didn't see that move. And I was like, oh no. I was like, that's what I was thinking. I was like, why did I check him in this way? He's just put his king in a better position. I was thinking, how did I miss him castling? And I was like, I was kicking myself. And I thought, hang on a minute, he can't castle, he's in check. And I'm like, I was just really, and I said, you can't castle. And then without even flinching, he just moved his king. And I'm like, was he playing with me? What was that all about? Was he tricking me? Did he know that? What was that? And I was so confused. I was so confused at that moment. I was just like, I don't even know the rules of chess. So it was quite amusing. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to the first example in the next video. So Potemkin versus Alekhine. In order to, win games like we're going to see here, I must emphasize that the losing side normally has to do one or a multitude of things wrong. Alekhine, by the way, features quite heavily in this course, which I think is great. Some of you might not be aware of his geniusness. because, there are more modern players. But I hope by the end of this course you will really be a bit of an Alekhine fan. And he had a really cool cat. I'm a cat man. I got Charlie the chess cat. Alekhine just had a cat called Chess, which he actually famously took everywhere with him. I don't think Charlie, my cat, would enjoy that. But whenever he played a tournament, apparently he'd take his cat with him, which is pretty damn cool, I say. So stop saying so, Simon. Okay, that's my one mistake. I'm perfect at everything else. It started with a closed Sicilian. And when white plays his G3 move, black normally aims to control the central square. So fianchettoing is what most players play. Now, you can play the dragon in the normal Sicilian, but it takes a little bit of time. But against this, the bishop is clearly best on the long diagonal. So bishop G2, and now knight E2, knight C6, nice control over these squares with the knight. And here C3, with some ideas of maybe going D4. And black simply develops with knight to F6. And I think black's strategy here is, rather than stopping D4, he wants to counter with D5. So if white does go for this, at some moment, because his knight here, he can play D5 and strike back in the center of the board. Now, white plays quite a slow move here, and it was much better now for white just to simply castle, play D3 and play F4, which is a plan being played for years. I think it was Spassky, called even the Spassky variation by some, made quite popular as a nice simple way to play against the Sicilian. But knight to A3 is not in itself a terrible move, because the knight is trying to get back in the game. But it is very slow, and there was more important things to deal with in the position. Because now black has D5 immediately. With a pawn on D3, you can actually even avoid this by castling. And it wouldn't be such a problem if you took here, because you could take the queen with your rook on F1. But in this position, white has taken his eye off the board, and he's only been concentrating on his own ideas. Massive mistake. After knight to F6, he should have realized that black was going to do this jab in the center and at least prepared for it. And here D3 is just not very nice. So white now has to concede the central structure. And already black is doing very well. Space advantage, nice development, nothing to worry about. Knight C2 now comes. Black playing very logical moves, castles, and now D4. This is kind of white's idea. And black opens up the position, and now pawn takes D4. And the author goes on to say that, this is a serious mistake, this one. Any modern player, I guess he's talking about 60, 70 years ago now, would take with the knight here. And he is correct. The knights in this position are really badly placed. I mean, what on earth are they doing here? They're doing absolute sod all. So you want to get them moving. And by taking here, you get an isolated pawn position, weakening your pawn, but without the normal compensation you get for an isolated pawn position. Normal compensation you get is having your knights on very active central squares. That's not the case here. So now Alekhine develops his last piece in a clever manner, creating some ideas of castling, winning that pawn, but also tempting white into playing a move which will weaken his structure. And we talk about this towards the end of the course. If you're still around by the end of the course and you've watched all those videos, blimey, Lord, you've done well, So I will, if I ever meet you, buy you a beer if you've managed to watch every video with my beardy face in it. So congratulations. But he's trying to provoke a little weakness. That is a little weakness. In this position, it blocks the bishop, but also weakens on this diagonal. So now the bishop comes back, and now we have ideas of capturing and capturing here. So white plays knight to E3. But queen A5 check is now a move that displaces the white king. And the reason for that is bishop D2 does not work. We can have a look, because of knight takes E3, bishop takes A5, knight takes D1, and black is going to come out of the mini complications, not that complicated. Piece up. Queen d2 is also very smelly because the knight can rampage over here. Not fun. So we're forcing the king out, but these moves that black have played to get this position, we should also note they have not been detrimental at all to his structure. This has helped him because he can get a rook to the d file, he's connected his rooks, he's developing, so all these moves have been very good, but he sees a bigger weakness in white's position, and it is the d3 square. And he wants to use that, so he moves his knights in, looking at his active pieces to work. White eliminates one of his active pieces, but now the queen takes over this very useful diagonal. And white's position is really getting incredibly bad here. This check is nasty, but white also has to contend with ideas of knight c2 and his pawn simply dropping off. If I was white here, apart from crying, I would have played rook f1 and tried to at least get my king somewhere. I'm probably going to lose because I'm dropping this pawn after the simple knight c2, but maybe g4 is something to contend. You know, you could fall into this trick, which I just did. But I mean, I think you just have to play this move. Obviously, even rook d8 first here is great, but the move g4 is very risky. And now we come to the second point that was mentioned. First of all, remember we said in the last video, you spoil your opponent's chances of castling. And the second point that you do is you pursue his king, normally with a series of forcing moves into the open where we can really latch onto it without, you know, losing material. And if we do lose material, then it must be for a good cause. So knight d3 check. And here, well, white is completely lost. He plays king to g3. I mean, a good a move as any. King f1 was better, but after queen b5, it's still disgusting in this position. The rook is horrible. Black's winning this pawn. Blech. This is what if my opponent got this position, or if I was sitting there, I'd be like, bleh. No, I wouldn't do that. It'd be a bit off-putting. So now, what move does black play? And it's a brilliant move here. So what is the correct move? And in positions like this, you should really be looking for the coup de grace, because we have great activity, 4 pieces. Our opponent's king is walking the fine line of death. If forcing moves don't work, like last chapter, we look at ways to improve and bring our pieces in, but we should be looking, the alarm bell should be ringing. There is a move, there is a move. Pause until you find it. Well, the move here is knight takes d4. And this is a lovely way to do a bit of boogie with the knights. These are sexy beasts. And white now decides to go down in flames. If he takes the knight here, well, we simply have queen check and taking here or knight here. So we're going to win the queen eventually and the game. Too many good moves. But after g takes, very nice, knight takes f5 check, and now king g4. It doesn't matter, other moves are equally as bad. h5 check, oh yeah. And now the king gets mated wherever it goes. In the game, it goes to h3, knight f2. Look at that. I mean, if I ever got a checkmate like that, I'd probably tear my clothes off and run around the tournament hall naked, screaming, yeah, I'm the king, baby. If the king comes out to g5, then bishop h6 is just as bad. Apparently there was a saying in this position, a lovely king hunt there. And there's I don't know if it's a Russian saying, I haven't necessarily heard of it, but the author reminds us that, oh, he's lucky to checkmate his opponent. Otherwise, he's losing his queen down. Lucky checkmate. Nothing lucky about that. The white player played some bad moves, and Alekhine played simple, effective chess to weave this position. Now, the three basic principles of trying to triumph against the opponent's uncastled king, or the king that's lost the right to castle, so we stop it from castling, is that first of all we stop it from castling, often with a check. Number two, we pursue it in some form, normally with checks. And number three, we kill it. And it must be mentioned that the second act there of pursuing the opponent's king is not always straightforward. And you should be pursuing it in a way that if it's checks, they naturally nourish your development. And this is key. You don't do it with artificial moves that are going to weaken your position. The checks that attack your opponent's exposed king should also be helping your development, doing some really positive things for the position for you, not anything which is going to force you to put a piece in a really bad square. That is unless it leads to material win. So this next example is a nice example of that. Clemens versus Eisenschmidt. And starts off with a Italian opening, but a line that players rarely can get away with nowadays, which is really sad. This is at top level. I think lower level you can get away with this, but the move now, the Evans Gambit. And, without computers, such a move was considered to be entirely dangerous and critical. White gives up a pawn to gain some development. And it was said that the player who came up with this was Captain Evans, who was a player from Wales, which is part of the United Kingdom, if you're not sure where that is. Apparently there's more sheep in Wales than humans, a bit like New Zealand. Beautiful country, actually where my father was from. My grandfather was a miner in the mines of Wales. And he was also a captain of a boat. And he came up apparently with this idea when he was sailing across the oceans. Maybe he had a bit too much rum or something. And the point here, of course, is after bishop takes b4, you play c3. And this is a useful move because you're gaining tempo, not just to expand in the center, but also to open a route for your queen to pressurize what we're going to look at later as a focal point, a weakness, f7. Now, black here plays a pretty terrible move, bishop c5. I've done a bit of work on the Evans Gambit myself, and this is one of the worst responses black can play. You never want to play into your opponent's hands. It just doesn't make any sense. And with this move, black is doing precisely that. Black is playing into white's hands. If you're going to put the bishop on b6, then you should put it on a5 first, because after the next move, d4, if the bishop was on a5, you clearly have other options as black, like d6, for example. But here, well, taking and playing bishop b6 has greatly helped white's position. For one mere pawn, white's got this tremendous center controlling all of these squares here. And pressure against f7, and he can castle immediately, which he does. So very nice position. d6, and now white just develops, and another bad move from black here, bishop to d7. Why play such a move? Putting a bishop on such a square is only relevant, I suppose, if you can castle. But this is very passive. It's really asking for trouble. So we can see here that black has been playing a couple of inferior moves. And what should we do in such a situation? Well, we saw earlier on in the course that a standard way to attack the uncastled king is down the e file. If we've castled, our opponent hasn't. In order to attack the opposing king, we've got to combine development, threats, and opening lines towards the king. e5 is perfect way to do this. And now after pawn takes, rook e1 was played. Queen b3 here is also very strong. Rook e1, logical enough. Knight g e7. And Now, in actual fact, there are two very strong moves. In the game, knight g5 was played, and the author's a little bit critical of this move. Now, he's critical because there's a better option. The better option is the more straightforward knight takes e5 here. And this is basically winning, according to the notes made by the latest changes to this course, the Chessable team in 2020. And knight e5 looks really bad for black. I mean, there's so many things coming in: queen, bishop. You even have a rook coming around. Pressure against f7. Ugh, not nice. But knight g5 is not so bad. It's still very strong. And here, black plays a key mistake. He gets panicked and he plays bishop e6. Now, he had to try castling kingside. And after queen h5, well, I mean, I'm being a bit positive about knight g5, but in actual fact, maybe I shouldn't be in the cold, hard light. If black had played the correct move, in actual fact, maybe white's not even that much better here. So knight e5 was definitely to be preferred. I mean, this position looks so scary, yeah? But the funny thing is, after bishop f5, black is actually defending everything, and white may have no advantage. So maybe this knight g5 is really just an error, which is funny that black can defend this position. Something like bishop f7 and d5 now. But here, black has the counter strike. Bishop takes f2 and bishop g6 with the pin on the bishop. So, mess. So, black really should have got castled. That is one of the lessons we're going to learn in this chapter. Bishop e6. What do you take with here? Well, I mean, it should be a pretty simple answer. Taking with a knight is okay because the bishop is very strong on e6, cutting off castling. But when you're attacking, tempo, timing, every tempo you can gain, you can save, you can attack with is a tempo that your opponent will regret you have. And by taking with the bishop and moving the knight in, we gain that tempo against the queen, and we're going to stop black from castling. Queen has to move, we stop him from castling, and now king to f8. Now, even here, we've stopped black from castling, but in actual fact, positions like this, they don't play themselves. It's complex, and you can still throw away the advantage in such positions quite easily, as white maybe did with queen g4. Bringing a queen in, this is okay, but if black had played knight takes d4, the position is actually very messy because black has good central control here. A much better move for white here would have been knight to h5, because then you don't get stuck in any pins, and now we can bring our pieces in a more natural way. Just get that knight out of trouble, but it's still a good attacking piece. The queen may also want to go to f3. So queen g4, and black returns the favour by going bishop takes d4. And the author goes on to say in this position, this game was played in 1890, and the standard of chess, it's surprising how much worse it was than nowadays. It really was quite lower. And the author goes on to say, we can forgive the 19th century players these inaccuracies. And what he means is, white now plays knight to e4 when in a much better move. Now, knight e6 is better because it stops the black queen from coming across to help the defense. You don't want to allow your opponent the opportunity to propose an exchange of queens and to defend with his queen. This would just stop that option. And the reason this works is that if king f7, well, we can go knight e4 anyway. And maybe white missed the fact that if queen takes e6 is played, it just loses to knight g5. So knight e4, and now queen g6 had to be played. You need to defend your king as much as you can. This queen b4 move, yeah, we're setting up a cheapo, we're gaining a tempo, but what about your king? White has so many attackers now around it. You need to huddle in and help defend. And now knight to e6 is very, very strong. And here we can pursue the attack of black's king with useful and good aggressive checks. King e8, knight f6 check, king f7. Try to work this out for yourselves. It still requires a lot of work here. This is a position you could still mess up. You should be looking for forcing moves in this position, definitely, because you have so many pieces attacking. There should be a finish. Pause if you need to. Well, knight g5 check. Let's keep forcing the issue where we can. And now the king has to go back, because if it takes here, we can just go queen e6. And after king g7, queen f7, king here, the knight moves with some checkmate with the bishop on c1. This bishop playing a good part there. So king f8 played, and now there is a key move which actually makes this a very beautiful example, which I've even looked at in a YouTube video myself. Clemens does finish it off beautifully. And the reason this next move works is, well, if there's nothing immediate here, and there's not, we don't want to check and help the black king run this way. You don't want to help your opponent's king check with these artificial checks. At the moment, these guys are not doing anything, so it's now about tempo. Black is threatening the rook, so we need to gain a bit of tempo to create a threat. I mean, the move we'd like to play is this one, but then, oh dear. You know, this is a really deadly threat. So we need to find a tempo gaining move here. So you've got to look for an aggressive move that stops the threat and gains time. And that move is bishop a3. Gaining that key tempo. Queen takes, queen e6. The king can't escape now. Knight d8 was played, leading to one of the most beautiful final positions in chess. If king comes to g7 here, then I have to think. But of course, there is a mate in this position. Where is it, people? Okay, can you get it quicker than me? And the mate is this one, is simplest. I was looking at the queen check, but this one forces the king here, and then we just slip in here. Okay. I was wondering if this one and here there's a mate, but I couldn't see it in this position, so which is a bit surprising. Maybe there is, but I can't see it. It's a lot longer anyway. Anyway, the beautiful finish occurred with knight d8, and now please say you can spot the two-move checkmate. It's a beauty. It's what I call a tombstone mate. When I die, I don't know if I might get cremated, but if I had a tombstone, what you put on your tombstone, if you've got one position you'd like to put on it from your own games of chess, this final position would certainly rank up there as a tombstone mate, because it's bloody lovely. Look at that. Beautiful configuration. Lovely position there. Well, just to prove that the top players nowadays and in the olden days were show-offs, Alekhine did this next one blindfolded. Yeah, all right, Alekhine, you don't need to show off that much, do you, mate? And it was taken from not just a blindfold game, the ultimate show-off, a blindfold simultaneous display. Bonus points given. Alekhine was just fantastic. You can see, actually, I have to say, after doing this course, my love for the guy has gone up exponentially. And here, let's see if you can solve some little puzzles now. Get that grey matter in your mind working. White to play and win. Pause if you need to. This one, yes, your opponent has castled, but it's the same principle of drawing his king out into the open and then attacking it with checks, finishing it off with mate. What is the best move for white? Pause now. Well, we have to be a little bit urgent because one standard defensive move, knight to f8, is coming. So if we go knight g5, knight f8 holds the position together. And there is a beautiful move, and you can find this move by looking for the major weaknesses in the position. e6, the light square is very weak, and also the combination of three pieces that can work around this square. And by playing the beautiful knight to f7 move, we are forcing immediate victory. Now, if the queen moves, it's very likely that black is going to fall into smothered mate. For example, I'm sure you know this checkmate pattern, double check, one of the most beautiful patterns around, smothered because the black king is smothered. And look at that, the pieces have gone back to where they started, but not with very good effect. So it has to be taken. And now what do you play here? It's all about drawing that king out with a lot of these examples, as long as you can satisfy the demands that you're giving away. Like we're giving away a piece, we need to finish it off. Pause again if you need to. This is a case of swapping around ideas. My first thought here was knight to g5 check. But after this move, black can set up some form of defense, maybe by running away here. Still looks very strong when we take here. If we go here, it's probably still very strong, but king g6 holds on, hold on. And often, before you play the move you want to play, if you swap the move order around, it becomes even stronger. Queen takes e6. Beautiful stuff. And the point being, if it's taken, knight g5 is checkmate. Lovely. And after king g6, well, we don't need to bring the knight in. g4 is a very nice, and it's one of those quiet moves, this one, because it stops the black king using the h5 square. If we try to force it with this one, well, of course, we're still winning, and we can play g4 here. But there's something quite nice and delicate about playing g4 in this position. And I think the point that was a blindfold simultaneous just shows what a genius Alekhine was. On the topic of drawing your opponent's king out, whether it's castled or not, the next one is maybe one of the most famous examples. And it's a brilliant example of Kotov, who wrote one of the best, regarded as one of the best chess books ever, Think Like a Grandmaster, which Magnus said he's never read, just out of interest. This is Averbach versus Kotov in Zurich in 1953. And in order to bring White's king out in this position, we must be prepared to invest a very heavy amount of material. A little tip I would give here, which again is called a cheat, it's a cheat tip I say, is that if you're going to sacrifice a lot of material, let's say like a queen, then if you can work out a line where you've got a forced perpetual check, that means you don't have to analyze the checkmate. You can play it out to where you have the perpetual, and then you've got a draw in hand. Now we have to play this move, because if we try something like rook h6 here, White has knight g1, and as soon as that knight gets to g1, White is very well defended here, and there's no way you're breaking through. So queen takes h3, draws the white king out. And the point is, after check, the king is coming, and after another check, he's coming even more. And this clearly is very dangerous, but it's the follow-up which is key. Somehow, if we try to play artificial checks without thinking, the white king is actually going to have a lot of freedom in this weird position, and we're probably losing here. We are a queen down. So we've got the king in a very dodgy position. We've got to be extremely careful about our execution now. And the best move here is knight d7 played, stopping the king moving forwards. And we're creating a threat now. And the threat is either rook here check, and then coming over to this line here to check. So that kind of checkmating idea. Or another one is to check here. The king goes back and our knight comes back, but we gain a very useful tempo with our rook in an attacking square. So the only defense is rook g5. White has got to try to give some material back to give extra protection to his king. And now we have an interesting sequence. Rook f8, king g4. And if you got this far in your calculations, you can see that after knight f6 check, we have a draw, at least. So we can get to this kind of position here by cheating as such. We know we have a draw. Okay, let's sack the queen. I'm not going to lose. Now black repeats the position, showing who's boss. And he decides, I might as well grab that little guy there. Why not? I'll come back. He can do this forever. And now he repeats the position again. Maybe another reason he's doing this is he's trying to calculate the checkmate, but he's trying to gain a little bit more time on the clock. So when he gets nearer the time control, he's got more moves. So it's a good strategy to gain a bit of time, as long as you don't give the draw away. And now in this position, he plays a very simple solution. And he simply captures that piece. The problem that white has here, there's no way his king can get anywhere safe. So black has time on his side. The white king can never retreat backwards. So by eliminating one defender, white's position becomes worse. He has to try taking it. And now a key move. We don't have an immediate mate with checks or captures, so we need to create threats with our free pieces to checkmate. And by playing rook f7, we create the threat rook g7, rook f6, mate. There's only one way to stop that, bishop h4 to cover the f6 square. And again, do try working this out whenever you want. You can pause and see how near to the real moves you get. But now rook g6 here. And in this position, we want to create more threats. How do we do that? Again, we have a draw, but we don't want that. Rook here, cutting off the king, creating the threat of rook h6, forcing bishop g5, and we now eliminate that next defender. And we create another threat, this time rook here, and bring a piece into the game. Quite logical moves, but do require calculation. White tries to defend that square, but black just eliminates that one. And after the queen comes back, we now go for rook h6 again. And after queen b8, rook g8, there's nothing white can do. Very famous king hunt, very nice example. And it works extremely well. Very hard to work out that 22 move sequence, but a way we can cheat is by having a bit of faith, making sure our opponent doesn't have a lot of counterplay, and also realizing that we have a draw, and a draw is not the end of the world. Well, this is another exercise really for you, Gligorich versus Petrosian, a Petrosian loss from 1954. With quite a messy position, but it's white to play and force checkmate. You should be able to work this out through looking at forcing moves. You don't need to be too subtle here. So have a go, and you want to draw your opponent's king out and finish with a checkmate. So pause now if you need to. Well, the most forcing moves are the captures. We are a piece down here. We can't divvy and daver, meaning take time. I don't know if that's an expression. I think so. My mum used to say that to me. Well, divvy and davering. Get a move on, boy. Not quite like that. She was much nicer than that. And here, rook takes g5 check is the move. And this forces a sequence of events. Black can't lose his queen. It's winning. If we take it, then queen there is mate. So the king, and this is the key factor here, the king has to come out. And now we want to keep forcing the events of the position and keep forcing our opponent's king out. And it's a beautiful win. Rook f6 check. The king comes out. And again, this is the key idea. Rook takes f8. Black has to take our rook, really, because if queen f7, there's a very standard distraction technique here when those queen and kings are near. And the distractive technique is to use your rook to just drag the king a little bit away. And this move would win now, taking the queen with check and probably mate very shortly. In actual fact, though, after king takes g5, h4, we draw the black king even further out, and there's no stopping queen f4 next move. Or in some cases, let's say the king goes, okay, if the king takes one of these two or goes to g4, this is checkmate. And if it goes here, we have knight to f4 checkmate. Nice, smooth little victory. A good way there of drawing that little guy out into the open, into no man's land, where he's exposing himself to many white snipers. The knight in this position is the victor. Okay, so I will start with okay, don't I? I apologise for that. It must get really annoying, but I suppose it's that word that sets me off, gets my mind like, right, bang, here we go. Okay. So you'll get used to it. Okay, so we're now going to look at one of my favourite games of all time, in actual fact. I'm very happy that Vladimir included this one in the course. And this is a lovely example of, attacking the opponent's king, bringing it out, drawing out, typical king hunt, shall we say. Now, I suppose when we're talking on the themes of attacking the king when it's castled, this one is really drawing the opponent's king out into the danger zone. And we're going to look at how Smyslov did this and how the game developed. Now, occasionally, I do want to take direct quotes from the Art of the Attack book when I think they're appropriate. It's a very hard job for this for me because I want to paraphrase things in a way I feel is correct, but I don't want to lose the essence of what the author was trying to get across to you. So doing the best I can. And I think before this game is mentioned, he does say some things which are very useful. So at this moment, I'm going to quote directly from his book. Now, he goes on to say, a player who is pursuing a king in a situation where the opponent's king is flight on flight, getting chased. You must keep your eyes open of many different factors, clearly. Two factors are particularly important. And the first one is the tempo of the attack. This is clear, tempo. If the tempo doesn't work for the attack's not going to work. And slowly but surely building up a mating net from which the king has no escape. As a matter of fact, and this is the point which I thought was very interesting and worth mentioning to a lot of you, this net is often of more importance than tempi and quiet moves which spin the threads, often point the correct way, whereas many juicy checks may prove to be mistakes. And this is a point I really think is so important. If the opponent has lost his right to castle and you're trying to chase it down, often superficial checks, Pat's a check, you could say, will help your opponent. You don't always want to force the issue. You only force the issue if it achieves something really tangible, material gain or checkmate. Often, when your opponent's king is weak, it's better to build up the forces, stop it from escaping, save those juicy checks, as the author calls them, until later on. So do remember that. You don't have to go mental check when chasing the opponent's king. It's often not correct to do that, as we're going to see in this next beautiful, beautiful game. So really, and then the author goes on to say, the attacker should hold on to that, what Nimzovich calls the threat is stronger than the execution, the checks, and not worry too much about short-term games in the form of tempting checks. The decisive result will be if you can capture the king or not. And again, these juicy checks are often artificial. And also another thing I would like to add to this, which I think links in a little bit with what the author is trying to get across here, is In chess, when you're attacking, there are often very tempting moves like create a threat, do a check, but you've got to work out if these actually improve your position or if they are superficial. It's very easy to create a threat. I mean, Scholar's Mate creates a threat, but there is a reason that not everyone plays the queen out here and creates a threat, because it's a bad move. You've got to remind Hikaru of that sometimes in his youth. But it's true that creating threats is a very good technique, but only when it improves your position or destroys, damages your opponent's position. So bear that in mind during this next game, Smyslov's, I think, one of his best games. Now, starts off as a Grunfeld opening, and here knight f3 is one of the main lines, bishop g7, and now what is coined the Russian variation, for obvious reasons, queen b3. It's funny how chess has developed over the years, because a sort of main-ish move, and surprise, surprise, one of my favourite moves in this position is h4, the immediate wing attack. And, you know, going back to the days of Smyslov, such a move would not be considered. I mean, you know, this game dated from 1949, but, you know, they wouldn't have even thought about such an idea. And maybe a modern evolution in attack has been shown by, I would like to say I played a little part, but people don't really pay any attention to me. I hope you do. But more so by AlphaZero, which obviously is not in the times of this book, but AlphaZero, the all-encompassing god of computer chess, has demonstrated that using the h-pawn as a wing attack is a very modern attacking method. We look at this more later on, but again, it's interesting to see how things have developed from my point of view as a professional GM in this book to modern day chess. And using the wing pawn at the right moment, you have to have some control of the center, as White does here, is a very modern approach. Queen b3 is also okay when White's idea is to gain the center, but Black's idea is to try and prove the queen is a target. Castles, White does gain the center, as he often does against the Grunfeld. Knight to a6 to prepare a typical break, typical counterplay. White develops, the break occurs, and now d5. Now, I can't take credit for naming the pawns first. This wasn't me. If you watch my YouTube channel, you will know I named the pawns. Harry, the h-pawn, blah, blah, blah. But the first recollection I have of a pawn being named was this one in the Grunfeld by Jonathan Rowson, 3-time British champion, who called this Delroy the D-pawn. And his explanation of this, why did he call it Delroy and not Derek, was that Delroy was a bit more sort of out there name, a bit more flamboyant name. And this pawn is like that. It's a real pain for Black because it can become passed, it can win endings. And it's a real important factor in the Grunfeld opening. And you have to know about the important factors when you're playing an opening from the white side or the black side. E6 now played, White castles, and this pawn looks strong to me. There was a recent game, if you remember, the candidates, Fabiano Caruana got a very similar position, a similar setup to this to crush Alexenko. So again, you can often see how old games like this, 1945, can affect new games and the top players. They learn like we're learning now. Black plays the queen over, maybe get a rook to d8 and have ideas of queen b4. Queen b4, swapping queens, is something that Black actually wants to achieve here. Why? Well, we've got to think who has the better attacking chances in a position. And whoever has the better attacking chances generally wants to keep queens on the board. And in this position, because of the structure of Black's fianchetto position, and we touch upon this in this game in more detail later, White has more attacking chances. Also, White has the more space. For example, a very standard plan is queen h4, bishop h6, knight g5. Very dangerous. So Black wants to exchange queens, and now a clever move, stopping Black's plan. Develop, and now White goes for this plan. This is a plan of dark square strategy. Dark square strategy, trying to remove your opponent's pieces defending his dark squares around his king. When your opponent puts pawns on one colour square, the light squares here, the opposite color, the dark squares, become targets for attack, and targets you should try to infiltrate. And this bishop, very good defender, in order to checkmate the king, you nearly always need to swap it off. There's only one way of doing that, and that's what white's trying to do. Black tries to get counterplay on the open file. The bishop exchange is offered, and now knight to e4. White eliminates that defender of the king, and now plays knight g4. Very clever move. So white offers a piece here in order to keep up the tempo of his initiative, which was started with moves like queen h4 and bishop h6. And again, this is where tempo is important here. Black has played a very forthright plan. And if we diddy about here with some move like rook e1, well, in this position, we're going to lose a pawn, but black is going to take the initiative on the e-file, and our attack, because of the loss of that one tempo, will disappear. And black now goes in for the challenge, accepting the challenge with knight takes c3. Now, black really should have thought about this in some detail before playing it and evaluated how dangerous his position is. If it looks really dangerous, obviously you don't play it. Therefore, a better option would be knight takes g5 when white only has a small advantage, I'd say. He's got an advantage because the d-pawn and these squares are still weak later on. But I'm glad he went knight takes c3 because we now see a beautiful sequence. Queen takes h7, of course. King takes. And now you have this situation. What do you play here? I do suggest you have a think about this. It's critical. Positions like this, if you don't find the right move, you will lose. So what should you play now? Pause again if necessary. Well, really, you have a choice between two options. You have queen takes f7 and pawn takes knight. There's no immediate checkmate. But this is a situation which we mentioned beforehand where the check is actually a waste of time. After checking here, you are rushing and the king takes another piece. And it has ways of maybe even running back to h6, and you're probably losing now. You don't have a good enough follow-up here to cause that king any significant damage. So this is a position where rather than rushing in with a check, a capture, forcing the opponent's king up, it's much better to take your time into weaving the net, and in this case, getting rid of that knight. So b takes c3, and the black now plays the critical mistake, king takes g5. I mean, if you can take a piece, bloody well should do, but in this case, white's next move left a very strong impression on me when I was a junior. I actually dreamt about playing white's next move when I was a junior for many a year. I don't think I've ever managed it quite yet. Now, what other options are here? Well, there are some scary options. And it looks like the best option is for black to grab the other piece. Rook takes e2. And now this check again doesn't get anywhere, so white needs to weave the net and play f4, threatening checkmate. A piece down. And here, rook f8, given by John Nunn. Now, this might still be losing for black with correct play, but you've got to put up the toughest defense you can. And this position asks white the question, what are you going to do next? And the next move I don't think is so obvious. You have to try to use your active pieces because your reinforcements are not naturally getting around. Your rooks can't come in. And queen h6 is the only way to do this, trying to get the knight in and threatening the rook. And after something like rook fe8, only now the very clever move, rook on a1, bringing in reinforcements, because if that's taken, we have knight h7 check, and then rook takes e1 check. And here, bishop to d3 is the best defensive try. And after queen h4, the king should try running, and now knight e4 check. And here, Black is in trouble. Again, immensely complex. But as you can see from the situation here, the black king has got back. Black is a piece up. So if white does not get through, then black is going to win. So this again was a better choice. But after queen takes g5, it takes a very clever move to really finish the game here. What now should white play? Pause, think about it, and take your time in this last game of this chapter. Well, I really like this next move, and I think throughout my career, really, the next move and the idea behind it is one of my favourite things to do. To come upon the idea of this next move, you would try to, first of all, start with forcing moves. If forcing moves work, great. Forcing move like f4 check could be natural. But after king here, let's say g4, well, simply something like rook takes e2, the king is running back. This is just not working at all. And there's nothing really you can do here. The king is going to run away. You only have a queen attacking. So f4 is not working. And if you try g3, trying to set up queen h4, a bit crafty, but again, the king can just start running back. So any immediate attempts here are not working. So you need to think about what your opponent's critical move is in all those lines, king f6. And the next move, the quiet move, queen g7, I think is a beautiful, beautiful move. When you see it, it might seem very logical, but for me, it certainly didn't seem logical. And it suddenly takes some time off. It's a quiet move in the middle of a storm. I love these things. You're attacking. None of the forcing moves work. Reinforcements aren't coming. It's cutting your opponent's king retreat off, which is key. And again, demonstrating the idea, quiet moves often better than forcing artificial checks. f4 is a major threat. So, for example, if rook takes e2, now this one is really playing a part because the king can't retreat. And let's give one variation where we force it to h3, and this would be checkmate. Okay, I'll give another one. If the king comes here, I think we've got h3, and we have a check here. And if here, we have this one and a check here, for example. So this is the winning move. So black tried the only defense, rook e4, to try and stop this one, but f4 works anyway because we have reinforcements. Rook takes, king takes, rook f1, and now if the king goes back, h4 is going to lead to mate. You can work that one out. And if king e4, what should you play now? This is another example of finding the right move in a position where it's maybe not so obvious, in the same spirit of queen g7. Well, here, the forcing moves, there's not really many, don't work. But black's king is hoping to come back this way. And with the quiet move, bishop c4, another quiet move, black is helpless, stopping the king from going to numerous squares and just preparing rook e1 and to mate the king in that fashion after that. This quiet move wins the day. So king e3 played, and now the queen comes in, king d2, and he can run, but he cannot hide. This quiet move, allowing the rook to come to f2. And now in the game, queen takes a3, was played in the position. And you can see that, well, there's a checkmate very close in this game. Can you see it? I'll give you a little bit of time just to work those checkmate ideas into it. Should be actually pretty easy. Let me get it right. Rook f2, and we're either going queen here or queen here. This is the longest one, and then rook or queen. So a very nice game. White made it look very easy. Lots of different things involved with that one. Good opening. The transferring of pieces to where the attack should be in a timely fashion. The elimination of opponent's key defender. And then when the attack was going, the quiet move and the key quiet move, this queen g7 at the right moment, stopping any retreat. It's possible to even destroy your opponent in short measure with the black pieces, and strong players can still be susceptible on occasions. Another game here between Belavenets and Krystyakov, and this one is yet another demonstration of how to draw that king out and to execute it in good fashion. We're taking the black side, the side of the winner, and it starts with my favourite opening, the French defence. Now, what I consider the main line, really, Bobby Fischer's favourite choice, knight c3. Knight d2 is the other main move nowadays. And the classical variation, knight f6, the move which I prefer to play at the moment. Bishop b4 is the winnerware variation, preferred by Botvinnik, but things have come a long way nowadays. And bishop g5 played, and now bishop b4. And this is the so-called McCutcheon variation. At the time of the book, The Art of the Attack, the author goes on to say that it's regarded as unfavourable for black, this opening. But of course, this is pre-computer analysis. And, you know, maybe white can get some slight edges in most openings. But black actually scores pretty well. And the database of games in this position says that black is scoring like 47%, which is pretty good. So it's a very tricky opening. That's the thing, repinning and starting tactics straight away. The reason I have never embraced it myself is that after the normal continuation e5, h6, only way to avoid losing a piece, it feels like my king side is a little bit, you know, insecure. I've created this weakness which I might regret. Bishop d2, and now the knight doesn't really want to retreat because then you've created a weakness for no reason. So you have to capture on c3 and play something aggressive such as knight to e4. White now plays a standard move, queen g4. This is the standard move in such French defense positions when the bishop has been removed, because white is aiming to create some weaknesses in black's position on g7. And here he does that after the move g6. And, you know, this might be perfectly playable for black, but I just don't like the look of this setup. I mean, where's my king going to go? But black is able in a lot of cases, as here, to get very active counterplay. And this is why I probably have to research this opening a bit more myself, with the standard break c5 and then play against white's queen side. So it's a double-edged opening. Bishop d3 now played. Now, in actual fact, I remember when I did look at this line, I was most scared about bishop c1. We saw this idea, or we're going to see this idea later on in the course. It's a Bobby Fischer idea, actually, not, you know, originating with him, because obviously the games in this course predate Bobby Fischer, but he used it in a number of famous games. You may lose a pawn, but the point is the bishop is on extremely tasty diagonal on a3. So bishop d3, and now black is able to dislodge the white king. And I'm not sure about this bishop d3 move for this reason. The white king would prefer to be safely tucked over here. It might look safe on this square here at the moment behind the pawns, but those pawns are advanced and they're targets, meaning that black, with the next move, c5, starts to hit against that center. And this is a position I certainly would want to play as black. My king is not great, but my opponent's king gives me some targets to aim for. Now, h4 would be like a modern way of playing the structure in the theme of AlphaZero. But knight to f3 developing can't be so bad. Knight c6, you certainly don't want to push on and give up any attacking chances in this position at the moment. You want to keep your options as flexible as possible. Again, as we see later on in the course, a move such as c4 has to be treated really carefully, because you are allowing your opponent now to have full control of the center. And that means there'll be no way to break that down. And, you know, we're even inviting some sacrifices. So you want to keep pressure against the center in counterplay for your weakened king side. And now white plays a poor move. Rook on HB1. There's no reason to play this move. There's no reason to keep the rook on A1. I mean, the only reason could be to use the A pawn, but white is, with this idea, doing something which I feel is breaking a basic rule, playing on the area of the board where he is probably weakest. This is okay if he can make some progress there, but black's area is the queen side, and I think he should be now doing a couple of other things. The modern treatment of this, and again, as the guys at Chessball have improved on the book, is actually very logical. And in the last decade or so, the first time I can remember, it was Grandmaster Bogdan Lalich played a similar idea against me, is D takes C5. Now, this is very uncompromising because you get the so-called Irish pawns. But the idea of this is to open up the position, not allowing it to close down. So it's quite a Nimzovich idea, hyper-modern. You're relying on your E5 pawn and you're opening things up, which will be dangerous for both kings. But after something like Queen A5, Queen F4, and Knight D4, white is able to hold those central squares with pieces rather than pawns. And this is like a very good way to play in the center of the board. Now Rook HB1 is played, and now just Queen C7. There's no need for heroics. The queen is well placed for the opening of the file. Queen H4, Bishop D7 developing, Queen F6, but after Rook G8, white maybe has made some progress, but there's no way to improve this position. H4, yeah, I could totally understand this idea. Now black creates his counterplay with Rook C8. And the next move is actually the start of white's problems, H5. Again, new analysis does actually say here that if white had come back, just trying to keep an eye on his center a bit more, this position could even still be slightly better for white, even though this rook looks a bit funny over here. Why not have a rook on h3 where it might join in somehow? So h5 allows black to open up lines. Of course, double edge, because black's king is not safe, but after g takes h5, this rook is ideally placed. Queen takes h6, and now it's time to open the position. Pawn takes d4, and now white makes a mistake. He plays pawn takes d4, allowing a little king hunt. It's this kind of position you've got to capitalize on the possibility to cause your opponent problems. And the next move is the perfect way of doing it. Can you see the move yourself? Obviously, we have these attacking pieces here, and we want to use them. And it's not just the first move you need to calculate, it's the sequence after that. That's the important thing. I mean, taking on this square is quite risky now. White has at least a draw, but you're giving up control of this rank. And after something like this, let's say the king goes, I don't know which square, a move like knight g5, it is starting to favour white here. I would, as white, try to swing the rook back to get on the open file. Black is getting horribly attacked. And the tactical move is knight takes d4. And this prepares a good attack against the king, which is allowed because of the conditions of the position. And one of those main conditions is now that black has an extra rook. And this is really a rook and queen attack. So it's quite unique that the rooks play a very strong part. They don't often do this in early attacks because they're in the corner of the board. Queen c3. And after king e3, maybe white thought he was safe, but now black increases the pressure. Rook to c4, using all of those pieces. And the king is in some serious issues here. Queen f4, trying to defend, but now rook to g4. The pieces are flying. And here, white played knight to e2, but this fails to a nice little tactic. In actual fact, there was some chances of survival if queen to f6 was played. Because after queen takes d4, king e2, white is getting his king back to some security. And here, rook takes b7 is coming. I knew that even in a perfect French, it's still a bad French. Not joking. I play the French all the time. It better not be true. I mean, this, okay, is still very dangerous for white as well. So it's an unbalanced position. But because white is under this pressure, it's very easy to crack. And knight e2 is now hit by this lovely move, rook e4 check, when we're going to win the queen with check. That is the key idea. And we don't have to give up much material to win the queen. So a nice little, it's nice to see a win with black in the French defense quickly. It does happen. I've managed to do it in some occasions, but it's reasonably rare as well. The following position here arose in the game Tartakova versus Yule, Venice 1948, and it's black to move, and black forces his opponent's king out. Yes, the white king is castled, but there are a lot of black pieces sort of hovering over there with a well-timed and well-calculated sacrificial onslaught. So again, I would suggest that you guys could have a think about this position. I mean, I think the first move, fairly obvious. It's a normal attacking move in such situations. But the real key is to how far can you calculate this line? And by pausing and then comparing your thoughts to what I'm going to demonstrate, it's a good way to see how your calculation is getting on, what you're missing, and if you're spending enough time on positions, which you will need to do in a real game situation. Otherwise, you have no chance, I'm afraid. So here, the first move is, of course, knight to f4. A very standard sacrificial idea when you have these pawns against the fianchetto position, because you're trying to tempt white to open up his g file. And in a lot of situations, your g pawn can come in, opening up the file so that you can attack the king. This works well here because of the added points of the open rook and opening the bishop. And certainly this is the first move that we should be coming in with. Now, g takes f4 was the start of Tartakova's problems here. It left the king far too exposed. As Camille Chessable, got some great courses there, check him out, points out, bishop takes f4 here is a much better move. And white's position would be defendable here because he keeps that pawn. The greedy move, taking that one, really exposes his king too much. Now, obviously, if we can bring pieces in with check and it helps our position, then we should do. And here, this does help our position. And unfortunately for white, the king has to come to g3. And clearly, if your king is coming to g3 in such a scenario, you've got to be extremely careful. King to g1 would just be met by g takes f4, when all black has to do is get a queen to this file. His king's in the way, but with such a net around the white king, white's king can't escape. For example, bishop c5, and the queen comes over. If the king tries to escape, then we have the lovely move bishop f1. And the queen can come this way, or we can simply take the bishop. So king g3, and now you have another chance to calculate this. You should have seen this position from the start and had a very good idea of how you're going to continue. The next move is very important. We often need to get our queen into the attack to be successful. But if we go queen d7 now, f5 is annoying. So of course, we take that pawn off first. And here, pawn takes bishop would be a big mistake because it gives the white king a new escape route. And in actual fact, your own king could be exposed there. You don't want to allow that. And queen d7 is one of these quiet and effective, brilliant moves. Bringing the queen in with powerful effect. Clearly, queen g4 can't be allowed, so white tries to cover that square. And only now, pawn takes f4 is working much more effectively. King takes f4, rook h4 check. And this now works because the king sort of treats this way. We have rook g4 check. And we have some horrible discovered checks or a queen diving in. If queen to f3, then there is the very strong bishop g2 check, another move which is easy to miss. the queen's either coming to h3 or the rook to e4, depending on white's reply. So king e3 is forced now, and bishop g2 threatens mate. So knight f3 blocks that one, and what would you play here? In positions such as this, it is important to play at a tempo. As soon as you take the foot off the throttle, as I've said before, you give your opponent defensive possibilities. So what should you do? Rook takes e4. Keeping the white king as exposed as possible and bringing in a knight a la tempo. Something like rook to h3 is not as strong because white can defend. And of course, if you can keep attacking, you should do, as long as it's sound. The knight now joins in. King to d3, kind of forced. You can't allow the knight to come here. And now another deadly check. Where does the white king go? If it goes to d2, knight takes c4, wins the queen. The same goes to c3. So both of these squares are out. If it goes to e2, queen takes f3. So it has to take a brave step forwards. We chase it a little bit more, and it doesn't really want to go to c5. So king d3 looks more sensible. If king c5 does occur, then the simplest win is actually knight takes c4, because you have this move coming in. You get a very good tempo here. And also the queen's coming to d6. Queen takes not so clear. But let's have a look how the game finishes after king to d3. Let's do it with check. King c2. And now after bishop takes f3, we can actually just play with the extra material and still strong threats. b3. White is bleeding here, but he's obtained some breathing space for his king. It's not enough. Bishop e4, and now queen d3, sneaking in. Rook g1, and black has very carefully calculated that his king is actually safe on e6, one position where the king is safe in the middle of the board. It can be safe temporarily in the center of the board. This is a big threat, so rook there to defend it. Queen d2 check, king a3, and now one more very accurate move here, knight to c4, a lovely finish. And the point is to come around the back now with devastating effect. And after here, queen b2, black is winning, white resigns. Again, you have to be very good with your calculation here. If king c5, this wins the queen, and we have the extra piece. If king a5, this is checkmate. So even until the end there, very careful calculation, but all the attacking stages, Yule wouldn't have seen that all the way to the end, but he would have seen the natural steps, and he's clearly doing okay in every process. So it's a sound, sacrificial, attacking attack to make. Now the game Chigorin versus Caro, 1948, and my words, this game will give you some headaches, and it certainly gave the experts at Chessable headaches. And I must give a shout out to the team, and in this case Tobias, who spent hours trying to work through the complications of some of the variations here. Now, as it's a video, I do want to show some key variations, but I don't think it's appropriate to just bang out variations with no meaning. The videos are here to try to help you improve in a way, in a communication way, from me explaining it, you picking up what I'm saying and being able to use those tidbits, not just E4, D4, blah, 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 blah. I'm not a robot, I'm a human. So I will try to navigate this the best I can, but go easy on me. Yeah, go easy on me. Go easy. It's not easy. So let's rock and roll. Now this game was an unusual game, and you know it gave rise to a lot of amusements in the tournaments, and many things have been said about this without computer analysis, which are completely true. And some chess books, I think, just gave up on this because it's just too complex. And this does illustrate a king going a flight of fantasy, I would say. It wanders about, and we're going to look at the side of the attacker, Caro, even though things didn't work out for him. Chigorin's king runs around. But the main point behind this game is that in a lot of situations, especially when the opponent's king is doing some mental walk, checks are not always the important thing to do. It's about bringing in the reinforcements and playing quiet moves that, again, as we stated earlier on, create a net around the enemy's position. Checks can often force the enemy's king into a better situation. So don't just check for the sake of it. That's really the main thinking process behind this. So let's have a look at the game, and we're going to dive into it. I mean, Black does miss a lot of good moves in this, and we're going to try to explain it in the most human ways possible. It starts off with an opening I've recently been looking at, and an underrated opening for club players, I have to say, and that is the Vienna opening. If you want to play in a romantic fashion, an attacking fashion, I mean, this course is kind of based on building up that in a very appropriate way. The King's Gambit nowadays is considered unsound. Unfortunately, I still play it. In actual fact, Gudhansen of Chess24 did a very interesting analysis of this, and he put it on a strong computer, and he gave the question, and you can have a go at this yourself, in the computer's evaluation of White's worst moves or best moves, let's say best moves in this position, where does f4 fit in? So obviously knight f3, according to computer, is better than f4. So that's one move that's better than f4. How many moves are better than f4 according to computer? You can try to work it out. I try to do that. I'm not going to try to do it again now, but it was something like f4 is considered the 20th move here, which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, knight c3 is a more refrained way of getting a King's Gambit position. And the main line, and what nearly everyone plays as Black, is knight f6 and now f4. And I think this is a very underrated line, especially a bit lower down. I played this myself with the black pieces, surprisingly enough, from a Dutch. d5, now an option from Black, and the best option. This is considered nowadays to equalize immediately. And here, d3. And theory has now discarded this move, and I agree with that, since Black has at least a draw, and you don't want to play for a draw, obviously. The main line here is pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, and in this position, let's make sure we get the board the right way around. We're looking at it from the attacker side, Black in this case. So pawn takes e5 and knight takes e4 now. This is the main idea. And White has a number of possibilities in this position. Knight f3, the most standard, and what's played most of the time now. Queen f3 is another line, but a line we actually see, which in the olden days, I say the olden days, which has kind of gone out of practice, but a line that I've used myself and brought it back to life, is the move d3. And d3 in this position, let's put that on the board, is a move which forces the issue, or tries to force the issue and create quite immense complications. When bishop b4 is one interesting reply. There's a number of interesting replies here. Queen to h4 is another one, but I think this is a modern interpretation of an old line. Probably equal, but very interesting. Now, if we go back to the game position, d3 is not correct. Here, Black can even go pawn takes f4 to get a solid position, but bishop b4 is a very fun variation to play. White now takes on e5, and Black's idea is knight takes e4, and this is theoretically a way, I think, that Black can just get a draw. And this can also come about from that other variation I realised. But I felt, but okay, I said it was d3 is interesting. I mean, nowadays this bishop b4 is actually, not considered best, but not many people know about this line for black nowadays. And after pawn takes e4, queen here, check, the fun starts. King e2, so white's king has lost the right to castle, and it starts a very long journey now to a1, not via that route, but just watch that king. Bishop takes c3, so the e4 pawn is under attack. And now bishop to g4 check. Knight to f3, and now pawn takes e4. And here, position is very dangerous. One threat is, in some variations, to take here twice, followed by queen h5, win the queen. So queen d4 is now considered the best variation. And this now, a lot of these lines the computer agrees to. You can try running this on the computer yourself. And bishop h5, the best move again. Just getting ready for this one, but keeping the queen there. King e3, and now bishop takes f3. And this is the so-called drawing variation. So I suppose my idea with d3 can lead to this, and black can draw with best play, but I don't think many players know this line. It's one of those, again, like I said earlier, an old line where with best play, your opponent can get a draw. So, for example, if you go now, g takes f3, the drawing line is this check, king here, this check. But I have to admit, I don't think many modern players know about this line, understandably. So that's why I've played this. I haven't played it for a draw, but I've had a little gamble that, okay, if my opponent knows this, it's a draw. And I've changed the move order about to confuse my opponents more. Now, after bishop takes f3, white plays a very risky move. First played by Steinitz, actually, against Blackburn, 1846. And the move is bishop to b5 check. Now, this does avoid the draw, but you're playing with your king on e3. So, according to the computer, it's certainly not entirely sound. But if you want to play all-in chess, why not? It certainly leads to an amusing game. c6, and now we have to take that bishop. Our advantage lies in that extra piece at the moment. And now the best move, queen h6. So Caro was the co-creator of the Caro-Kann, hence Caro. And here he departs from the theory at the time and plays a move which is now considered the best theoretical move. And the funny thing is, when this game was played, theoreticians actually disregarded this move because of the result of the game. White ends up winning, but that's not the point. White was losing this game. And that is often the case. Like I say later on in the course, the history is basically often told by the winners. And if someone wins the game, it doesn't mean it's a perfect game by any means. Now, the other variation here, the old variation, used to be c takes b5. But after queen takes e4, queen takes e4, king takes e4, this could potentially give some advantage to white in the ending with the centralized king, the bishop. Yes, there's some weaknesses, but this is a dynamic endgame position, and certainly with a lot of play where white, I think, can claim a small edge. Now, queen h6 avoids any of that by keeping the queens on the board. And now, well, here it comes. King takes e4. Now, had the king gone backwards to e2, probably it's a draw again. So, with some perpetual based on queen to h3. And this is one of those openings where if you're going to go into it, this forced variation comes directly from the opening. So it's not one you can sort of go on general principles. It's one you need to know. But as long as you memorized it once, Chessable will help you do that with their opening trainers, you will know it. Now, after king takes e4, again risky, you can see the king is very badly placed. So for the time being, Caro plays well. He goes queen g6 check, king e3, and now he simply takes the bishop. White plays bishop a3, stopping black from castling. knight c6, queen d5. And this is where the move played seems very logical for black. Queen takes c2. But in actual fact, there's a very strong, practical and good move here, which I think 95% of modern strong grandmasters would actually play. Can you find it? And this is to do with practical chess, as in, you are attacking, but there's nothing immediate. So you've got to think about your own king, get your own pieces into the play. How can you do that? And the move is pawn to b4. And this is actually, I think, a move just most players will play. And this maybe puts a stop to White's whole strategy. The point is, you give a pawn back, sure. Let's say pawn takes b4, but now you can castle. And in the resulting position, even though White's a pawn up, that's a relevant pawn. It's clear that black is doing incredibly well. We don't even need to calculate here. The white king is really exposed. There's one file to attack our king, but we can easily step out of that. And our rooks are quickly coming to these dynamic squares. White can maybe try to win the exchange, but, even rook d8 here stops that. And there's going to be sacrifices. This is clearly a very clever way to play b4. Getting the king safe first without getting excessively involved with numerous complications. It's kind of a safety first strategy, which modern players do use all the time. After queen takes c2, the chaos continues. Rook c1. And black has effectively lost a tempo there. And in positions like this, tempo, timing is key. Grabbing a pawn seems natural, but it's very easy to defend. And black's lost that key move, even though it's still incredibly, again, unclear. White goes rook on he1. And again, b4 should have been played here. And I don't know why Caro was so much hanging on to his pawn here. And instead, he plays rook d8. White gets rid of that pawn, so now the black king is pretty much in as much, well, I say as much danger. It's in some danger. I wouldn't say as much. And now Caro plays a6. And the point of this is to try and gain the d3 square in a lot of variations. For example, queen takes b7 just fails to this and this mate. So it's a nice quiet move, and I like these little pawn moves to force your opponent's positions to weaker squares, distract them away from their main defensive ideas. The queen keeps an eye on that one. White would love to exchange queens. And now queen g5 check, f4, queen g2, keeping the queen as active as possible. Bishop d6 played. And now queen h3 check. To now engineer a possible escape for the king via d2. White would have to give up his h-pawn. And this comes with not just temporary danger, but permanent danger, because then in any ending, black has middle game, a very simple plan. So white decides, rather than going for that option, which is, a risk without any benefit, he will gain more from going king e4. And at least now, if black captures this one, a counterattack is possible. So he's gambling. But black plays the next move perfectly, f5 check. In this case, the check is correct because it forces the white king into a more dangerous position and it gives our king some way to escape. So the king now has to come forwards. Capturing it just allows rook takes bishop. And again, this position during the tournament was understandably creating amazement. You can imagine the spectators looking at this. And it was, the reason was some of the spectators actually thought that a mistake had occurred and that clearly the king and the queen were the wrong way around. And some of them wanted to get, a very funny story, the organisers involved and make sure that they could tell the well-cast players that they got their queen and king the wrong way around. Yeah, sure. And swap over the king and queen. And it is pretty bizarre. But actually what happens is that king is going to find its way back to a1, which it shouldn't be allowed to do, clearly. Now, queen to g2 check is played in this position, and this is the key error. Because how does queen g2? I mean, it might still be all right, but it's the principles I'm trying to get to, not the calculation. Calculation can often be based on not principles, but on pure number crunching. The reason I'm trying to help you improve from videos is general principles that make you think in the right way, so your calculations become a lot easier. And this check, through pure principles, kind of helps the white king go the way it wants to go. Why encourage the white king to move away from the center of the board? That would not be advisable in the normal sense of the word. It makes much more sense, therefore, to do what we've been looking at and create a net around the king. And the best move to play here is indeed rook to c8. And this makes so much more sense, because now if the king tries to come this way, we're going to have a discovered check with the knight. Incredibly complex still. And one key variation which Tobias worked out with the help of computers, or Chessable, Tobias, a worker at Chessable, strong player, nice guy, is king c4 now. And this is really the only chance. So already we can see, rather than, doing that move and forcing king c4, this must be an improvement because we've got one more piece in the attack. But actually this just doesn't work here because the knight a5. So we've got to, white's got to take on b7. And this is where I said I may well get a little bit confused. Let me just king c4 is one of the moves, excuse me. And this is a crazily complex position. And one thing I would suggest you do, if you want to know more about this, is look at the book notes. Because again, me trying to do this in a video is just going to lead to confusion for all of us. And here, actually, if we do try to force the knight check, just to let you know, the white king can start running this way. And because our queen is way out on the other side of the board, white can escape. Now, there's unbelievably, in this position, a winning move. And this winning move, I find quite astonishing. And it's clearly a computer move. I mean, it's mind-blowing. I don't expect any of you to find it, unless you're cheating. And the winning move is g6. Why? Why is that a winning move? The point is, white is in Zugzwang. I mean, you have to have such a high understanding of chess, above mine, above most people's, to understand now that any move that white plays will be a mistake. Because if the king continues running, our knight will have this move, at the right moment. Or if it goes here, another option is queen takes h2. And this king will not get back. And now we have ideas knight a5, keeping the king in that position. So it's phenomenally hard move to find. I mean, g6, saying to white, you don't have a good move when your opponent's king is in the middle is crazy. One of the craziest moves in the whole course, I feel. Okay. But the principle is this move, rook g8, is the principled move because a check is artificial. We might as well get another piece in and then try to work out what happens. Now, after queen g2, white starts running. And in actual fact, this is still, funnily enough, okay for black. b5, logical. And now white's king goes to d3. And this is another mistake. It should have gone to b3, when actually black still is marginally better after knight a5, and now the king must not run into a check on c4, but come to b4. Insane. But black has the initiative here, and again, you can look at this in the notes if you so wish. After this move, king d3, black misses another strong move, and he falls into the same trick he fell into with his check. He goes on a check rampage, but remember what we said. Checks really are only good if they achieve something concrete. What I mean is you're getting your pieces to better squares. You're developing nicely. You're applying pressure. You're doing many good things that improve your position. The check played in the game, Queen F3, is not improving the position. It's helping your opponent. So why play it? So saying all that, Black should play knight to a5. And this, again, is so much more logical. The knight is no longer needed there. It's coming to c4 to try to get rid of that bishop. Our queen will only move when it's forced to move. Why move it unless it's forced? Obviously now, if it's kicked, we can check, but we've gained an extra attacking tempo. So again, why force the situation? Mental game. Let's have a look. So now the king starts getting a bit more comfortable. Queen f2. Why is black checking? King b3. Only now does black play rook c8. And here, rook c2. And look, it's found a home. And now queen takes f4 played. And after king b2, I think it's clear to say that black has thrown this away with his superficial queen. Maybe this is where Patsa Caesar check came from, even though I'm not criticising Caro for this crazy game. Well, only slightly. He finds the move knight a5 now, but why now when the king is safe? King a1, queen c4, but it's white's time. e6. And this pawn becomes dangerous. The white king has found this lovely home. Black now plays knight c6, which is another bad move. This is a lot of errors in this game, which I think is understandable. It's such a crazy game. I mean, it was Korchnoi who said games with more errors are much more interesting because they have much more drama and they have many more interesting moments. In actual fact, a perfectly played game, which will probably be a draw if both players play perfectly, is relatively boring to watch. Games like this with drama, with exciting moments, much more fun. And now queen d1, of course, white now brings the main piece into the attack. This has backfired. And here, black should keep, of course, the option of g6 and try to play a move such as rook d8 to pressurize, expel some of white's pieces. He plays h5, and again, Vladimir just says a terrible move. The issue with this move, as in most pawn moves, well, not most, a lot of pawn moves, they create gaping holes. This one, a gaping hole on g6. But white now blunders with rook to g1. Astonishing. White should have played in this position, well, nearly anything else except for rook g1. And it's funny that this move was actually awarded an exclamation mark in Vladimir's original book. I mean, of course, you can't get everything right. The simplest way to win is actually just bishop b4, trying to get the queen in this way. And if rook d8 to stop that, rook d2. And black hasn't got time to do anything here. White wins very straightforward. After rook g1, black now returns the favour. Black now must have been shocked by the position and thinking, I've thrown it away. And it just shows you that you should never, ever give up hope, especially in complex positions. And you've got to be so mentally tough. If you know you haven't done what you should have done, and if here is black, I would be very annoyed, but I would try to refocus my mind and not give up. And here, there is actually a move, and the move is knight to d4. And this keeps black's position together. Amazing. After rook to h7, which is paramount to resignations, white breaks through with rook takes g7 because the queen's entering with a kill. Rook takes, queen takes h5, and it's clear to see queen h8 will be mate. I'm glad that one's over. Commentator's nightmare. And you can see in this situation, this game, it was a game of a lot of different aspects. Opening preparation is so important. If you're going to play sharp lines, that opening, it's a draw. You can risk it as white. I would do on occasions, not against every player, but against certain players. Very exciting. The king hunt was fascinating as well, but black played with his queen too much when he should have brought in reinforcements, and that is the main thing to learn from this fascinating encounter. So it kind of feels that in this part of the art of the attack, the author has stepped down the rabbit hole. Some kind. What was it? What's the song by? Oh my words! Can't remember the band now. One pill makes you Jefferson Airplane. Great song. Good old 60s band. I mean, it's all getting a bit wacky with kings running around the board, getting bigger, getting smaller. What have they been chewing on is what I want to know. And it's a fun part of the course, but it does have some things we can learn. But, these are enjoyable games. The next game, this game, it has been called the Immortal Drawing Game. Immortal because it's a fascinating encounter. And in this case, we're going to take the side of the king hunter. The white king goes on a tour de la Alice in Wonderland. And it actually takes refuge in its opponent's pawns, which is totally unique. But it's an extremely fun game to show. So we have another Vienna. This time, bishop c5 played. And now already white plays a move which is very, committal. It's asking for trouble. The soundest reply here would be something sensible like knight to f3. But knight to a4 asks for the next move to be played. And in return for the next move, black obtains a great attack. Bishop takes f2. Already we're stepping down the rabbit hole. King takes f2. Queen h4 check. This technique we've seen before. Really, don't ever fall for this. I have done. It's embarrassing. This kind of idea with the queen coming out here. I fell for it once in a King's Gambit. Really not pleasant. And here, king to e3 is probably the only move, because if you play g3 in the position, then queen takes e4. And the problem is, black is attacking the knight as well. So we get our material back with some extra. If king to e2, it's the same problem. So here comes the madness. Luckily, black no longer has a dark square bishop to attack this, but look at that king. So now the fun starts. Queen to f4 check, and the king starts its wander. White has grabbed that piece and is saying, okay, if you can't make me, I'm a piece up. I'm a brave king. Probably the bravest king I've ever seen. It puts other kings, Henry or Richard, so what's it? Richard, the guy, I don't know. The kings of England. I'm not a historian. It puts them to shame, this little guy. And now what do we do in such a position? Well, we can't just win with our queen, so we need to do two things. Open up the position and bring in pieces. And the move d5 does precisely that. It opens up the position and tries to get the bishop in. And white continues his march. King c3. The idea, I think, is quite clear. b3, king b2, I'm a piece up. Well, hey, off to work we go. And now a bad move, queen takes e4. And the author goes on to say that it surprises me that even to this day, grandmasters play this move. I believe that d4 in this position gives white some big problems. And it's funny that this king march may be playable for white, but I wouldn't want to do it unless I was drunk or doing something in Amsterdam, which I don't do anymore. So queen takes e4 is considered an error, because now rather than king b3, which is played, I can understand the idea of this. It's to stop b3 because of checkmate. White has a strong move, and white should be playing d4. And suddenly, with this move, white covers everything, and he's safely a piece up. Example, knight c6, and only now b3. because the king can come back and he's stopping any threats. So this is actually hugely advantageous to white, hence why queen takes e4 is a mistake. Amazing. So king to b3, and now knight to a6. Another mistake as it allows d4, which was not played again. a3 was now played. The king trying to sneak its way back. Now with the idea of knight c3 and king to a2. So how do we stop that maneuver from happening? Because remember, we are a piece down. And this is a strong idea. Just get back to safety. Well, we have to take drastic actions. And in this case, we have to go for a direct attack. We have to bring that king out more. It only gives a draw, but white is actually doing quite well now. Knight a6 was not the best of moves there. Just to go back and maybe consider a better move than knight a6, which I should have, of course, done. Knight c6 would be a much more logical move when you have two ways for the knight to get in. Or even d4 again. Because in this position, like before, the move d4 allows the bishop to come in. But knight a6, not good. But after a3, black now plays queen takes a4 check. Astonishing. And after king takes knight c5 check, the king can't get back easily. In actual fact, king b5 here might even be better here. And white, this is a total mess. White might be really just about getting out somehow. I mean, a fun position to analyse on your own, I feel, but not very relevant to improving our attacking chess. King b4 played, and now a5 check. Lovely stuff. Not allowing that king to go back. The knight can't move because the king would. Now, king takes c5 is the only move. If king takes c3, then this would lead to mate after d4 and b6. When the white king is trapped in a mating net here, we can maybe even play c6 next. For example, let's say queen to f3, bishop e6 check. And in this position, there's an amazing line with queen d5, and the amazing line here is actually knight to e7. But also, bishop takes queen is much more logical, and then just f6. And the computer indicates black is better here, because that king is not... Look at the king, you've got to laugh. He's hiding behind the black pawns. No, you can't play chess like this. Now, after queen f3, bishop e6. Let's just see what happens if the king comes to this position. Does black have to go for a draw here? Is that the only option? Well, no, because e4 is good. And e4 blocks out the queen. And in actual fact, we can come in now with our minor pieces. Knight there, c6. And white's king will not survive here at all. There may even be c6 immediately and more checks here. So king takes c5. The king's got to keep going. And now knight e7, because you can't allow the king to do its little run around and come home. And here, bishop b5 check. And the point is, the c pawn moves. The king has more squares. So king b8. And around here, black must be thinking, yeah, I've got him, because I've got b6. Easy. But there's only one move that white can play to survive here. Can you see the only option for white in this position? It should be easy to find, because it's easier to find the only moves when you're desperate, when every other move loses. The only move is bishop c6. Only move. Everything else loses. And now b6, king b5. And again, the king is trying to come around, so we've got to stop that. So we have to play knight takes c6. The point being, if the king tries to run, we can stop it just in time with a multitude of checkmate ideas that white can't escape. So the king comes forwards. Of course it does. And now bishop b5, bishop b7 check. Of course. And here the draw is sealed with king b5, king b5, bishop a6 check. and a very boring draw. Probably the most boring draw I've seen. That and the Berlin defence exchange French. You might as well just put them in the same category. Amazing. Now, before I end, I would like to point out what happens if the king decides to take on b7. Well, the problem here is we can move our king and then go rook b8, checkmate. King d7, white has one check, king d6. There's no defence against this. Astonishing. And another variation I should also consider is if the king goes here, well, we can just play bishop c4 and there's no defence against b5, checkmate. So they had to agree a draw with this series of checks, and I think I've just lost my mind during the course of that game. Are you feeling like me? That was entertainment but chaos of the highest order. The immortal draw game. How can you not enjoy that one? We couldn't have a proper course on attacking chess without numerous examples from Morphy. Morphy, dating back a number of years, even for this course, this game to 1859, involving a king hunt he had against Barnes. Now, some of the things I love about Morphy is just the pure forward play energy of his pieces, checkmate at all costs philosophy. He was a genius. He always went for the kill. In the time of the 1850s, the kind of chess that people played was swashbuckling. You had to accept sacrifices, and attacks were, romantic and romanticized, and the way that things should have been done. But it has to be said, defensive mechanics were not very well developed as they are nowadays. But we can learn a lot from Morphy's just really aggressive play. It was really to the point, and I always suggest to people who play far too cautiously to look at Morphy. And the game starts off with bishop c4, which is a rather irregular way to meet the Petrov, but for Morphy, actually, a rather regular way. And the position is equal after this move. But again, this is the kind of move I would have thought that nowadays might have some great surprise value, because the Petrov is becoming more and more popular thanks to Fabiano Caruana. A lot of the Chinese players play this as the Berlin is going a bit out of fashion, and nearly everyone takes on e5 here, and a move such as bishop c4 has some great surprise value. Knight takes e4, not showing any fear, and here knight c3. And okay, with modern theory, this is considered dubious. It was first originating from Karazaixkai, who was part of the Immortal game, if you can remember that one, or the Evergreen game, one of those, maybe the Immortal. And Black can get advantage here, but only if he knows precisely what to do. So again, this has surprise value. He should take the knight, other moves will lose too much time, which he does. And now, because White sacrificed the pawn, it's all about the open lines. And D takes c3, does precisely that. And here, Black plays the best move again. Otherwise, knight takes e5 is going to be strong, or knight g5 with this f7 point, which we looked at earlier on in the chapters, being a critical point of attack. And the only move really to not give White an advantage is the rather illogical f6 move. And that's why I think this opening's got quite good surprise value, because playing a move such as f6, not everyone would want to abide by such a policy. Really for the reason that it does weaken Black on the diagonal. But Black has a very solid formation, and White, to break this down, will often have to sacrifice his way through it, which is not going to work with best defense. White now castles. I don't know the theory here. I think knight to h4, though, at some point might be correct. Well, it is on the next move, but is it also possible here? I don't know. Have to do a bit of research on that when I'm away. It's not. I mean, I suppose with these lines, if the computer just says it's really bad, you shouldn't spend too much time analysing, because you don't want to play lines which you know are just, with correct play for your opponent, going to leave you in trouble. But okay, castles. And now black plays in inaccuracy, queen e7. And this is a very logical move. It gets in the way of the bishop. Yes, it consolidates the centre, but it becomes a target to this knight h4 move, which is what we want to play anyway. And here, well, okay, I mean, to me it looks wrong. I mean, it's actually, according to latest 2020 theory, it's not that bad. And it's the next move, which is black's big mistake. Maybe even some sources recommend this move as defense, but it just looks a bit weird to me. A more logical way to play this is knight to c6. Let's get some pieces out. And white needs to do something here, otherwise where's the compensation? And knight h4 again is the move. And after g6, f4 has some meaning. And now f5, attacking the knight, is apparently an advantage for black. I'm not going to get involved with all these lines. I guess black has to play d5 after knight takes f5 because the queen coming in. And again, you know, this is not an opening course. There's enough on them on Chessable you can go and look at. So I'm not going to get too involved here. But after knight to h4, black should now play g6. And if black plays g6 here, okay, this variation is still considered to be better theoretically for black. Most sources saying they don't really see much compensation for white here. And, you know, the commentators at Chessable even go on to say that it's a safe position with no compensation. I mean, it just looks a bit scary for me. But I guess one of the points is this move is met by queen c5. So maybe I was a bit critical. I'm trying to, as you can tell, freestyle this opening without knowing it so well, give you some of my own thoughts, which I'm not doing in every game. But it's nice to look at positions afresh, I find, without knowing any theory, because you can put your thoughts to them and then compare it later to the theory and see where your thought process is letting you down. Okay, so there you go. But the move played, d6, is not a good move, because after queen h5, black has to move the king, and you don't want to move the king, especially when white has this lever pawn to f5. Now, knight to g6 fails to queen e8, but f4, trying to open up position, entirely correct. There's no queen c5 anymore. Black tries to exchange, which white allows, and now white opens the position by taking on e5, at least opening one file. Don't really want to open up this file, so black takes with the d pawn, but the king is always misplaced. And now knight to g6, regaining a pawn because the queen is coming in here. And the issue here is that white can get out of any queen e8, queen f7 pin because of the check on d1. So queen e8, boom, winning. So black plays bishop c5 check, the king tucks over, rook e8, and now white gets the pawn back, but with a much safer king position, an initiative, and slightly more active pieces. So things are looking good. Black begs for the exchange of queens, but white would be completely crazy to give him that wish here, even if you love endings, not in this position. If your king is safer than your opponent's, you should nearly always keep the queens on the board because they're dangerous to your opponent's king. Queen h5, knight d7. Now here, b4 is played, and this is the kind of move that maybe nowadays a lot of commentators would frown upon, and even at the time the author Vukovic says that this is a positional mistake because you forfeit the c4 square. And he gives the move a4 as being correct. And here, pretty much saying that after a5, it's still not so clear because black can have this maneuver, a standard maneuver if your rook is stuck in the corner. But he still gives this as being better. Now, b4 is a very tempting move. And in some cases, I think this is quite a nice move because the positional considerations are not so important when your opponent's king is in the middle. So it's a typical Morphy move, not worrying always about positional stuff because the pieces are more important and the energy behind the position. So you have to weigh up those things very carefully. Black comes back again to try and consolidate his king. Now the next move I would say is an error, bishop d2. The bishop was much more naturally placed on e3, and this is very strange to see Morphy play such a move where he doesn't maximize his pieces. Queen f7, queen g4, getting out the pin, queen e6, queen e4, and now knight b6, and owing to the weakness on c4, White's position has lost a lot of its sting. So Morphy, being Morphy, probably realizes that, and he decides to play very riskily, give his knight to keep the initiative going. A lot of people here were going to defensive mode, but not Morphy. Queen takes b7, and this is probably unsound, by the way, but it's also typical Morphy. He would keep the initiative at all cost. And again, modern day chess, it's not so possible to do this because black, in black, I mean, players, black in this position, players on the defensive side just know how to defend better. Queen g4, and here a4, which is another rather unsound move. Rook c8, this knight is trapped. Rook a d1, queen takes here, bishop e3. So Morphy trying still desperately to get any attack at any cost. Knight c4, consolidating the bishop. Queen c6, and again, typical tricky Morphy. If the knight takes on e3, we of course take there, and this will get our piece back. You can't take the rook as a mate, and we're going to go here and take here. Tricky Morphy. Morphy decides to take on a7, but this does seem rather strange play. And the next move from black throws away the advantage. And this is the thing, in these positions when you're on the back foot, you have to be so accurate. Morphy's played some inaccuracies, but it doesn't matter so much because he has the initiative. Harder to defend. And here, I mean, what would you play in a defensive manner here? I mean, I think most people would probably find the right idea here. What would you play? What would you play? Well, I think two ideas here are good, but what we're going to look at later, the self-defense king, a king that looks after itself, following the flight squares, king e7, followed by king f8 and king g8, leaves Morphy really struggling for any compensation. I mean, black can also play queen e6 first, just getting the queen in a nice solid position, making sure everything's really defended, and do the same maneuver. I don't see the compensation here. I mean, if I was white, I'd be a little bit embarrassed with my play so far. Oh my God, if I just said that about Morphy, I might regret that. But after e4, this is really unfounded because it's tempting maybe to push this pawn, but why do that when your king's still in the middle? Later on do it, but get your king safe first. King's priority in life. Morphy should now play rook to d5, which would have threatened the knight on c4. But he returns the favour by moving the rook to a slightly worse square. And now queen h5, black is starting to get his own threats, with the queen coming here in some situations. So white plays rook f4. Again, Morphy uses his pieces to such maximum potential. Even when he's a piece down, he puts his pieces on squares which other people would seem are impossible. e3. So it looks very scary here, but it's a little bit unclear now because Morphy now complicates with this move g4. And one thing, even here, let's even say black is winning in this position, which he's probably not. The point is, by black playing this line, he's given Morphy chances. The position is coming really complex. You shouldn't do that in a winning position. He should have just kept it safe. Why randomize when you're winning? e2 comes, yeah. And now black gets another queen, king g2, check, king h3. And now it's Morphy's king, which is on the run. Now, in actual fact, queen takes c3 would have been the way to play this and just bring the queen back to a central square. Black tries now f5, which to me seems again a rather irrelevant and slow move in a position where timing is key. Black not understanding that concept of timing with this move. And here, queen takes c4. And Morphy has calculated that his king can actually do a little bit of running. And now black plays another mistake. Queen g1's a better square. After queen g2, white has a very nice move here. And allowing the queen to g1 would have given black another possibility. What should white play here? Should he take the pawn or go rook g4? Well, it's all about the tempo. Morphy understands this much better than his opponent. And by playing rook g4, he blocks the g file, and by doing that succeeds in getting his king to some safety and gaining a tempo or two so he can try to advance the attack. If the queen was on g1, it could go to e3 in these positions, but now pawn takes g4 is played. And, well, again, Morphy misses an opportunity. It's unbelievable, this game, actually. It's not that high standard, but it's entertaining. And he plays queen f7. But again, this the one thing I'm picking up and picked up from this game is the lack of urgency in their play. In positions like this, do you really have time to play such slow moves? Well, no, you have to be looking at moves that are instant. And here, rook takes d6 is the move you look at first. You have to do this. And the long line, starting with here, check, will lead to a winning position for white. For example, king c7, check. And we've got this pawn in some positions. King d8, queen f8. And we're slowly pushing that king around, you can see. And you can clearly see that Morphy is well in charge here. So this queen f7 move is very, very strange. And now after queen f6, consolidating all the threats, there's nothing. b5 was tried, but now queen d7, black playing some good defensive moves all of a sudden. Rook takes d6, last punt, but queen takes d6, and Morphy has thrown it away. And actual fact, now Vladimir goes on to comment that Barnes, the player of the Black Pieces, actually had a very good score against Morphy because of his distinct positional style, relying on solid defense and not taking too many over, big risks. Yes, he did in this game, but still, his style of play was not something Morphy enjoyed. He was actually a British player as well, and he was the most successful British player against Morphy, that's for sure. So there we go. One more crazy game to go on, and then we'll move to another chapter. Now, the last example in this chapter is another fun little adventure into the realms of, I don't know, let's say another dimension chess. And Michelet playing against Kazaritsky, 1845. And, this is more curiosity, this last game, and some of these other games, quite amusing. And here, the hunted white king is saved, and it also goes on to participate in the attack of the black position. And the key to this success here in this game is actually the confinement of black's queen. Black's queen is pretty useless throughout the course later on of the game. So in 1845, the King's Gambit was all the rage, romantic chess, and both sides would always play in very forthright ways. G5 being an interesting move. Now, nowadays, knight to c3 would be my recommended way of playing this position, which actually I think is okay. The point being, if g4, you come into e5. And if queen here check, you have g3. If black takes, you can take here. And if black gets greedy with his check, winning a rook on h1, this position is actually winning for white, believe it or not, after this move. And white's attack is much stronger, even though he's a rook down. There you go. So g5, bishop c4 is another interesting line. And after g4, white now plays knight e5, which is okay, but I think more in the spirit of this position is castling kingside. Just give the knight up. Now, with correct defense, black can defend this. But it is a more dangerous continuation. You give up the piece to go straight for f7. It's a matter of opinion. The King's Gambit has gone out of fashion because these kind of things have been worked out. So it's not really recommended. Hence why knight c3 is sounder. Now, after queen here, king h1, f3 now comes. And this is the so-called Cochrane Gambit, which is favourable for black, without a shadow of doubt. But another option, which also scores very well for black, is knight to c6, just offering f7 to attack. And in these positions, I think it's clear that the white king is in as much trouble as the black king. So f3 does try to open up the position. White responds with central play. Knight to f6, knight to c3. Now, taking on g2 is not actually correct because white does get now tremendous ideas on the f-file. And actually here, white's got very good compensation. I prefer white. This is something that Vukovic maybe underestimates in the original text. But black tries to develop, much more sensible. And now white should stop black from castling, clearly. But he doesn't. He plays g3. And after check, he should now move his king to e1. But he gets adventurous with king f2. And here, d6 is the wrong way to play. If you've got an opportunity to chase the king, that's the first thing you should analyse. And here, queen to g2, followed by the natural developing move, knight c6, is a simple way to play. Your threat is bishop h6, knight b4, mate. And white can't actually defend this position. That's what happens when you put your king on e3. It's not that surprising. The idiots of old. I'm going to get in trouble soon. No, I mean, I wish this kind of chess was still playable. I'd love to have been around in the 1800s because the games look so fun, don't they? You can randomly put your king in the middle of the position and, win by absolutely obscene means, which nowadays you just don't see. It's romantic. It's the old era. I can imagine them sitting with their nice suits, having their cigars and a big crowd going around and, and pondering over their moves in these coffee shops. I mean, it just the picture of it sounds brilliant. Now, d6 is a mistake for that reason. Rook f8, knight g5, and now black goes for the check and plays bishop h6. And again, knight c6 was better here because after king d3, white's not so badly placed. He can stop the knight coming to b4 with a3 simply, which he does. Black swaps off on g5 and now tries knight takes e4. And this is incorrect, this sacrifice. Sacrifices are not always going to work. But black's position was inferior, so I can understand why he played this. If you've got an inferior position anyway, and a sacrifice is probably unsound, then playing it I would not criticise too much personally, because at least you're complicating, giving yourself better chances. But, black could have played knight to a5, something else a bit more active with b6 coming and the bishop coming to a6, still keeping some pressure without having to sacrifice. So knight takes e4 was played, and again in this era lots of mistakes were in around, and here white played queen e1, but he should just simply take on e4, and after bishop f5 just get that king safe. I mean, blooming heck, these guys, they really, the safety of their kings was not paramount. Get the king over to a2 and breathe. And if you do that, your opponent's king becomes the target. White is winning. So queen e1, mistake. And now f2 is actually very strong here, but bishop f5 is tempting. Knight takes here, and now f2. Queen e3, king d7, and black's initiative now looks very scary because the pressure here, f2 pawn. For one piece, this is very decent. Bishop d5, defending that one. Rook e8, increasing the pressure. And now rook on a to f1. And this is funny because white actually encourages black to carry out his threat to win the queen. And comes up with an original idea to it. But this is actually the wrong rook. The other rook should have gone here. But now a typical scenario arises. If you have an opportunity to win some material but lead to a messy position which is hard to assess, or you have an option just to keep the pressure, not to bail out at the first option, realizing that your opponent can't do anything to escape, then of course you should keep the pressure because your opponent's more likely to make an error. And rather than taking on e4 as black now does, a much better move would have been bishop g6. You keep the eternal pin on the knight, you threaten rook f3, and white just doesn't have a response to this move. Much better way to play. Now after bishop takes e4, bishop rook takes here, rook f3. This is actually the idea that white had gone for. And his idea was the unbelievable here, bishop f5 check. You can see why maybe this rook would have been needed earlier on in some of those other lines, but this is an amazing concept by white, and you've got to give him a pat on the back, Michelet, for such an idea. He's basically saying, okay, well, I'm a queen down, but look at your queen. It ain't good, man. It ain't good. It's boxed in there. And after rook e6, this is a horrendous pin that black's in. d5, and black is running out of moves. He can only move his knight. Knight e5, king e4. And white is simply winning now because he can only move his knight. He can never get out of this box. h5, pawn takes there, king e8, bishop f6. You can even just get rid of this last one. h4, trying to get the queen out. But after bishop takes here, king takes, it might look like all of a sudden black has made some progress. But white now uses his king in the attack. King to f6, unstoppable threat, bishop g6 and e7. Amazingly fun game there, but not particularly high standard. Let's just go back and have a look at that one option when the rook moved there and just see why the other rook would have been a better option. Now this is where the rook moved there. Now this move is at least a bit better. I mean, your rook is clearly, you don't have the same idea. I mean, this was really, the move played in the game was a tricky idea and it led to a beautiful win. But I suppose after bishop g6 now, you have some defensive chances with this one, just because your rook can play a part maybe later on. So, but I you know what? Even though this move is considered a mistake by the computers, the way it worked out, it was beautiful and it set a very nice trick. I wouldn't normally recommend setting tricks, but the position looks pretty grim for white, so why not give it a go in such a position?